And good morning, friends, and welcome to this sunny morning. It's going to be, I'm told, 19 degrees out there. How's that for spring? But today we are here for a very interesting talk by our friend Alison, who is the director of Quaker Action, Alcohol and Drugs. And she's here to give us some words of wisdom. Alison.
Thank you very much, Ray, and good morning, friends. It's lovely to see you today. And thank you for Patsy for inviting me to give this talk and for the support that she's giving to Quad in many different ways. Really appreciate it. I'd like to begin, if I can, if the technology allows, with a very short video clip. It's only just over a minute long, and I'll show another at the end. But I find it helps to frame, if you like, what it is I'm going to say afterwards about Quad and our work. So I'm going to share the screen and see if I can do this. Can you all see that okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Dear Nikki, every day I think of you, my sunny, popular brother. I think of how you died at 56, alone, abroad. I miss your voice. Even in the last year of your life, through the lockdowns, we had good long phone calls. But the week before you died, you were so angry about the pandemic. You kept repeating yourself, I knew you were drinking again. Your personality changed like Jekyll and Hyde, and a different creature spoke. After you died, my other brother Hamish and I found notes in your house. Just give up A completely. You've used it for years to numb the pain, you wrote. You, who had so many friends, found solace only in alcohol. And yet, also in your notes were to-do lists, travel plans. You wanted to live. Alcohol destroyed your mind. I wish I'd spoken years ago when I saw the whiskey on your bedside table, your disappearances at get-togethers, then later the sweating, the shakes. You always said it was some virus. I got weary of the lies. In his condolences, one of your colleagues wrote, I will miss enjoying a glass of wine with him after every meeting. He didn't know. You were a partner in a law firm and you hid your addiction well. People ask how you died, and as I tell them, their sympathy fades to silence. But I want to say you lived and we loved you, and I so wish you were still here. Love from Dill.
I'm sure you can agree with me. It's very moving to hear that. And it comes from a campaign by Anyone's Child called See Beyond, which is looking to combat the stigma associated with substance use and gambling. Let me move on to a short talk, if you like, I want to do about Quad and about our work. Some of you may already be aware of us, but I thought it might be helpful just to give an overview of the work that we do and our concerns. Okay, so I've called this Among Us, and this title will become clear as we go through, I'm sure. So the first thing is to say that Quad has got very deep roots. We began life in the 1870s, originally as the Friends Temperance Union, which gave witness to the Quaker principle of abstinence at that time. And it took nearly 100 years, in the 1960s, for moral welfare to be added to that title, when the concerns expanded, if you like, to look at greater moderation rather than abstinence, but also in looking to support families and friends of people who are affected in this way. Quad became Quad in 1996, and Quaker Action on Alcohol and Drugs. We also incorporate gambling harm, but we failed to find a way of incorporating G into the acronym, as you can appreciate. We're a Quaker recognised body, We're also a registered charity, and we're a company limited by guarantee. The director, myself, and previously Helena Chambers, who some of you may know, we're the only paid employees of Quad. And I have a board of trustees, extremely supportive and insightful group of people who support the work and advise me on a regular basis. And we're funded entirely by donations and legacies. We're extremely grateful to all the local and area meetings around the country who remember us in their appeals, and also we're left legacies from time to time from friends who wish to see our work perpetuate, and we're very grateful to them. But we're not funded by any external charities or trusts. So in terms of our work, as I said, we're concerned with alcohol, other drugs, and gambling. Sometimes people talk about alcohol and drugs, but increasingly the reference is to alcohol and other drugs, and I've adopted that too, because as we know, alcohol is a powerful drug in its own right. And we're concerned not just with the experience of individuals who are affected directly in this way, but also what's known as close others or affected others. So family members, friends, colleagues, and people in the wider community. We do this in sort of three broad areas. The most important area of our work is supporting friends and supporting meetings. Supporting friends directly, so I'm available to people who may wish to ring me or contact me in writing. Often those are close others. Almost always it's concerning alcohol. I understand why people be concerned about contacting me about something that is illegal. And I never hear from people affected by gambling, but that may change. But I'm there to support people. I'm not a trained counsellor, but I can listen, and I can signpost people directly to national and more local sources of specialist support. In our support for meetings, I'm available to come along and give talks to meetings, which I've done. But also we hold periodic, what we call QuadNet meetings, and we did one recently in Cardiff, and online in January, where Patsy was our speaker, and we're planning to do more in-person and online meetings this year. We're also holding our biennial conference for the first time in 6 years, thanks to COVID, and that'll be later in the year, and I'll talk about that at the end. The other area of our work we call our public work, and that is more to do with looking at policy and specifically looking at things like white papers. I respond to consultations run by government departments and the UK government, Scottish and Welsh governments as well, looking at what it is that's being proposed and bringing the Quaker voice to that. I think I should say that Quad doesn't respond on behalf of all Quakers. We are a registered, recognised body, but we work within the context of Quaker principles, and wherever possible, we stress the particular nature of the Quaker perspective on these issues when responding to these consultations. We also work ecumenically with colleagues in other churches. So, for example, there's a Faith Action on Gambling Harm group that Quad has been represented on for many years, and that helps us to find a common ground with faith-based organisations so that we can respond collectively where we feel that that would add weight to what it is that we're saying. And the third aspect of our work is work with young friends and young adult friends. By and large, that's not directly, but for example, Quad belongs to the Quaker Youth Work Network, hosted by Friends Life at Friends House, Quaker Life rather, and that's in order for us to make available to people working directly with young people the information and the knowledge that we glean from the work that I do, from the research that I do, and also we're there if people would find it helpful for us to come along to talk at meetings and to engage with young people more directly. So I wanted just to pick apart the three aspects of our concerns, beginning with alcohol. Safe, regulated and celebrated. Those are three words that came to mind when I was thinking about how alcohol is perceived in our culture in the UK. I think most people, if you talk to them, they would say there's no harm in having a drink, and I subscribe to that broadly. It is regulated, as we know, and I think in our culture, more widely in Europe and North America and elsewhere in the world, it is celebrated as a way to celebrate and something that people really enjoy. They bring into their lives and they think of it as a positive thing. We also know that alcohol has a dark side and that it significantly impacts on public health. The harm related to alcohol use is known, with the caveat that I think that people think that you only get harmed if you drink a lot, and that there are only certain types of harm that can result from drinking alcohol. So, for example, most people I speak to, their perception is liver disease, heart disease, stroke. Not that many people I talk to will also reflect that they understand how many cancers are directly related to alcohol use. And it's not necessarily just people who drink to excess. So breast cancer, for example, alcohol is a significant aspect of that. Pancreatic cancer, throat cancer, larynx, mouth. Those are recognised within clinical professions as being directly affected by alcohol use. And so we know there's physical harm, there's also psychological harm. There are risks associated with drinking, even at low levels, and you'll be aware that the government advises that we drink within a maximum limit of 14 units a week. I don't know about you, keeping account of how many units, what is a unit? If you're talking about wine, how strong does the wine have to be to qualify it? It's very complicated. We also know that very large numbers of people drink way beyond that. It's an interesting dimension to this of self-regulation, if you like, of how much we drink, how much we monitor what we drink, and how much that's a problem for us or not. And the costs associated with alcohol are personal costs in relation to what we've just been talking about, but there are also costs, financial costs to society. And I'm not going to quote lots of statistics here this morning because I'm not sure it's really relevant, but the last note that I have of how much drinking costs UK society was £21 billion. And that comes from the Cabinet Office in 2003. So we can assume from that it's significantly higher than that. People may have heard of minimum unit price for alcohol. It's probably the biggest issue at the moment that gets talked about in relation to alcohol policy-wise. Both Scotland and Wales introduced a minimum unit price for alcohol 5 years ago for Scotland and 3 years ago for Wales. And Scotland is now talking about continuing that and actually increasing it. All it means is that alcohol cannot be sold below a price per unit of alcohol within the drink. So what it's helping to do is to reduce, increase significantly the price of very high strength, very cheap drinks like white cider, which is commonly used for people who've got a serious alcohol problem and street homeless people. If you're interested in looking into minimum unit pricing, we do cover it in our newsletter, and you can always contact me. But I think it's one of the aspects of alcohol policy that's noted by the World Health Organization as what they call best buys, things that can have the greatest impact on tackling alcohol-related harm. And the other thing briefly to say is about young people. You may know this already. Young people increasingly are sober or significantly reducing the amount of alcohol they drink. It's a trend that's been around the last few years and it's sustained. There are a lot of theories as to why that might be. It doesn't mean they're not using other substances, but young people and alcohol, we can't automatically think it's the kids in the park drinking that's the problem. It's just as much the middle class affluent people who are sitting down and opening a bottle of wine at home every night and not perhaps appreciating what the impact of that might be. So just wanted to put that in because I want to counteract the stereotyping that when it comes to problems with alcohol, it's largely young people's problem. It's not. And we come on to other drugs. And again, I try to think of 3 words that might capture the common perceptions around this. Certainly, I think a lot of people think that they're dangerous. Obviously, being illegal, many of them, they're unregulated. There's a black market and all of the links to crime and dealing and the harm with county lines, etc., that sort of fall from that. And I think I've used the word deliberately immoral. I think there are people who perceive the use of illegal drugs as being something that is immoral, and therefore those people are to be judged. And I will come back onto that when we talk about stigma a bit later. Again, we know that there's a significant harm to public health. Very large numbers of people are seriously affected by using drugs. Not everyone. Recreational use of drugs is possible without serious physical harm for some people. But we do know that, you know, a significant number of people either die or are permanently harmed health-wise and psychologically by their use of drugs over time. And there are obviously risks associated. I was talking about county lines, for example, and the use of young people to go out into rural communities and sell drugs, which can damage them and the people that they come into contact with. And also the costs. And again, the latest figure I have is about 22 billion. But it's extremely hard, as you can appreciate, with something that's illegal to measure anything in terms of use, misuse, damage, and costs. That's one of the arguments that's used, obviously, when it comes to the question of reform, both in this country and internationally. And it's an exceptionally complex area of work, and one that I think will continue to be so. There is depenalization, there's decriminalization, there's legalization, both in this country, in Europe, and around the world. I don't know if any of you have seen the latest copy of our newsletter quadrant, but I've given a review there of several countries. Germany, for example, has just decriminalized cannabis. In America, there's a state that's done a major U-turn because after 3 years of decriminalizing all drugs, they have found that the problems resulting from that have led them to have a serious rethink on that. And Oregon are now going to recriminalize some of the A-class drugs, including fentanyl and heroin and crack, that they had previously tried to previously legalized. And I also just wanted to touch on the fact that when we talk about other drugs, we're not just talking about illegal drugs, we're also talking about those illegal and prescribed. And there are arguments and there is progress in making some drugs available for certain health conditions on a prescription basis. And there's also research being headed up by David Nutt, who some of you will be aware of. He was a drug czar, I think, back in the day. But he and academic colleagues are currently doing research into the use of ketamine, for example, and psilocybin, magic mushrooms, as a therapeutic tool for people with serious mental health conditions that have been resistant to other drugs that have been tried in the past. And that evidence is emerging and is interesting. And we're keeping an eye on that. When it comes to gambling, 3 words again. The perception is that it's safe, it's heavily regulated, and it's fun. We'll be aware of that strapline on all the adverts: when the fun stops, stop. The dark side is, again, a public health issue. Considerable harm is experienced by some people who gamble. And if I tell you that an estimated one person a week takes their own life because of gambling harm, largely young men aged 18 to 25. The costs of gambling are astronomical, and as we know, because gambling is effectively moved online, everybody has a casino in the palm of their hand if they access gambling websites online. The risks are substantial, not just to the individuals, but to their families. You can lose your life savings, you can lose your home, you can be made bankrupt, you can be in a position of having stolen from your employer, for example, as I've heard many people talk about, where the whole infrastructure of your life can collapse very rapidly through gambling. When I first was appointed as director of Quad, I didn't know anything about gambling. I knew a fair bit about alcohol and drugs from my previous professional work. But I was interested, I was quite curious as to why Quad was concerned with gambling as well as substance use. It didn't take long for me to be in this role and to learn about the research that had been done and the stories that I heard people tell for me to understand all too well. And there's also a cross-pollination, if you like, or comorbidity, if you like, between using substances and gambling harmfully. It's a hidden addiction, unlike substance use, in as much as you can continue to gamble secretly, even from the people closest to you, until such time as it becomes catastrophic, without any external signs. You can appear functioning completely normally, and be having a serious gambling problem that you keep secret from everyone. And I'm interested in what counts as gambling. I've had some lively conversations with people, friends, in meetings and outside, who say, well, what's wrong with buying a raffle ticket at a church fete? And what's wrong with the odd scratch card? What's wrong with buying a lottery ticket from time to time? It's for people to decide for themselves. But when the National Lottery was launched many years ago now, Friends House issued a statement on behalf of Quakers nationally, which had an in-principle objection to the National Lottery, because effectively it was a way of generating funds for good causes, but those good causes had previously been funded by central government. And what it was doing was normalizing that transaction, which said, well, I will donate to good causes as long as there's a chance I might get a prize. And so there's a spectrum, and every individual obviously is free to choose what it is they do and don't do. But I think there's a question of thinking about how the gambling industry has normalized gambling in our society, particularly around sport, not exclusively. But in my work, I come across the debate around something called loot boxes, which some of you will know are available in online gaming. And kids upwards of 10, 11, 12, typically will play their favorite games. And every so often something will pop up and they will be offered the chance to buy something in a loot box, which is unknown. You pay the money first and then you find out what your prize is. And the big pull is you could win an iPhone. Mostly you might win a hat for your avatar. There's about £20 million a year spent by young children on loot boxes, but the government doesn't define loot boxes as gambling. But it is, in Quad's view, and in the view of many other people in this field, a way of grooming young people into expecting a reward and being excited by that process. And the other thing I'd say about gambling is the white paper that was finally published after many years of consultation and then delay. The white paper last year was published, which looks to reform the 2005 Gambling Act to reflect the fact that gambling has moved online substantially. And a lot of my time and work and attention has been spent ever since it was published last summer in responding to multiple consultations on different aspects of that Gambling Act. It's huge. And again, I won't go into detail because we don't have as much time as I'd like this morning. But there's a lot in there that could potentially be really good in terms of reducing the harm that people might be exposed to. But there's a big lacuna, and that's advertising. And it's very interesting to see that the government is not tightening up on the one thing that when I have conversations with people outside about gambling, people say to me, oh, all those adverts on television. Yes. The gambling industry spends billions literally on marketing and advertising every year, and they wouldn't do it if it didn't work. So I just want to move pretty quickly onto a couple of broader themes, really. I'm interested in the word addiction. Is it a symptom? Is it a cause? So many people whose stories I've heard in person and online talk about the fact that they started using substances or gambled to numb, to self-medicate, because they've experienced things in their early life that were very painful. And when they picked up their first drink or smoked their first joint or played their first game, it provided them with relief, and that it put them in touch with a place where they could go, where they didn't have to think about what was causing them great anxiety and distress. I think that when we talk about addiction, there are people who talk about at risk, people who drink harmfully or hazardously, or people who are dependent on a substance or on a behavior. I see addiction as sometimes quite unhelpful, in as much as it focuses people's attention on the far end, where people are dependent, who cannot live without the behavior or the substance, without clinical or specialist help. But a spectrum exists, I think, and that it isn't necessarily a linear one. People can move up and down that spectrum. People can get clean, get sober, as we say, can stop the behavior that's causing them grief for periods of time. Frequently, that is a pause rather than an end, and they will then go back into what it is that's causing them a problem. But if we ignore the fact that even at a relatively low level or an early stage, people can still experience harm, then we are ignoring that much larger number of people who aren't on the park bench with a paper bag, or aren't seeking out somewhere where they can access an illegal substance, or they're not sitting in their room at night, all night, gambling their family's income. But there are people who are still doing that at a lower level, who may need help and support, and most importantly, understanding and compassion. And the other thing that I wanted to say, I'm going backwards, was that whole issue of comorbidity and complex needs, that frequently we find that people using substances may also be gambling, and the triangulation with both of those things and mental health or poor mental health. And that's a key issue for those who are trying to support and treat people who come forward and seek help. Is typically substance services are reluctant to take people who are experiencing mental health issues, and mental health support are very reluctant or find it difficult to treat people if they have an ongoing problem with substance use or gambling. And that is a perennial problem that in the 30 years I've had contact with, that these areas of work still hasn't been resolved. So the other sort of broad issue I wanted to talk about this morning is stigma. And this is something that with all the events that we're running this year, I really want to keep the focus on this. There are a lot of charities at the moment that are running stigma campaigns, and the Anyone's Child clip that I played at the beginning was one of those. Stigma acts as an extremely powerful barrier for people to talk about what is happening in their lives. And that is as much the experience of families and children who are affected perhaps by parental use, as it is by the individuals themselves. Without being able to talk, the isolation and the shame and embarrassment and stigma can prevent people getting help at the earliest stage, which might help them avoid the most serious impact of what's happening. It's extremely important, I think, when we talk about these issues, to think about the language that we use. We can get tangled up in knots, and I do in my work. We talk about, or can we talk about alcoholics, or do we talk about people affected by alcohol harm? Do we talk about drug addicts, or do we talk about people who are using drugs or using illegal drugs in a harmful way? Do we talk problem gamblers? That's something that the industry, the gambling industry, is very keen for us to do, and that's been taken on board by the Gambling Commission and others. We talk about problem gamblers, and when they do that, or addicts, they other someone. They position the problem within the individual. They don't talk about what may have led to it, or the fact that the use is within a context which is geared up to making sure that they are hooked in. So I think it's worthwhile us thinking about the way that we use language so that we don't stigmatize individuals. Something called the Big Tobacco Playbook, something I find I constantly refer back to. It's something that began in the 40s and 50s when there were growing concerns about the potential harm of tobacco. It was regarded as very glamorous by Hollywood, as we know, in the early days. But in the 40s and the 50s, I think there was some people starting to make noises that actually it might not be too good for us to smoke. The tobacco industry invested millions in making sure that they muddied the water on this. They hired their own academics. They paid for their own research, which, surprise, surprise, came up with evidence which showed that tobacco wasn't carcinogenic, that it was safe, and that all those people saying it wasn't were actually causing unnecessary public panic. That playbook carried forward. The oil industry picked it up, environmental industries. I see it very vividly in the work that the industry, the gambling industry, is doing now. And I think it's an interesting area to look at. It's a tactic, it's a strategy, it's a very deliberate one, and it's linked to very powerful commercial interests. Between 6 and 10 refers to close others. It's very hard to estimate, and this is a broad estimate, which I think is actually quite a useful one, because we talk about the ripple effect. We talk about, for every individual who's personally affected by the harm of substances or gambling or other behaviour, there are between 6 and 10 people who will be harmed by that. And when I talk about be harmed, there are stories I've heard from people, some quite well known, others ordinary people who've made their stories available in the public, who talk about what they've been through in trying to support people they love, who they see being seriously harmed, and themselves having their mental health, their financial security, their children's upbringing being directly affected by what's happening at home, and being unable to talk about that due to stigma and embarrassment and shame and a feeling of guilt because they haven't been able to stop it. 1 in 5 comes from a recent documentary I saw by the National Association of Children of Alcoholics, NACOA, which took up the research done a few years ago now, which found that 1 in 5 children in this country are affected by parental alcohol use. Again, it doesn't have to be the hard end, it doesn't have to be dependent drinking, but 20% of children in this country are affected in some way by their parents' use of alcohol. I found that really startling and shocking. And if you're interested, there's the NACOA documentary, which is called 1 in 5, is available publicly, and you can access it on YouTube or via the NACOA website. It's about an hour long, and it's very well worth watching. I might pass over that, except this quote by a respected academic and clinical doctor in the States, who views addiction as a developmental pediatric disease. If you get to the age of 23, 24, having never used a substance that's addictive, you'll not develop an addiction. That's quite something to say. She does a lot of lectures to parents and to classes in high schools, and she talks about why she feels that way. And there's a growing understanding now of how the adolescent brain is affected by substance use. Between the ages of 15 and 25 or thereabouts, the brain goes through a major restructuring, and introducing drugs and alcohol into that adolescent brain can radically change the way that that process happens. I think it's good that this is being more widely recognised. So I'll skip over the rest of what I was going to say there. I wanted to just give a shout out really of our conference. It's the first conference we've held since 2018. And it'll be held at the beautiful Laund Abbey in Leicestershire. And it is about breaking through stigma and letting through the light. And if you are interested in learning more, contact me or look at the Quad website. So that's me, except that, if I may, before we have any questions, and I haven't talked for too long, I'd like just to play a second clip from the See Beyond campaign. And this one, see if I can get it. Is it going to work? Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Dear Dad, it's not easy to know where to start in writing this letter to you. I can remember the first time the impact of your drinking hit home with me. 2 photos taken a decade apart at family weddings. It was so clear what negative impact your excessive drinking was taking on your body. This may sound strange, but I keep thinking about the TV program, Who Do You Think You Are? And how will you be thought of by family members in the future when they read your death certificate and cause of death, alcoholic liver disease? They might find those photos too, but won't have ever known you as a person, the entertaining and charismatic man you were, the life and soul at the pub or at the races. Will they know that the cards you were dealt in life weren't great either? Losing mum at such a young age with 3 children between 7 and 14. We try to remember the good times as a family, but we probably don't speak about it enough, because it often returns to the few final difficult years of your life. Since you died, you've missed so much. You've sadly not had a chance to meet your granddaughter or see your grandsons grow up into fine young men. I wish I'd taken a more proactive role to try to get help for you, Dad. I miss you and love you, Miles.
Okay, thank you, friends.
Thank you, Alison. That was very interesting and very thought-provoking.
Yeah.
So I'm sure. Well, I think we have covered the situation very well with your wonderful talk, Alison. And thank you very much for being here and listening to our questions. So,
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
next week, my dear friends, we have Quakers and aging. I think we all know about that. I look round at the people here. And that's with our friend Eddie Knazel.
Oh, lovely.
So do come.